The incandescent chandeliers of the Majestic Hotel's grand ballroom in Barcelona reflected in Isabella Vargas's champagne flute. But the sparkle failed to reach the icy dread coiling in her stomach. This night was supposed to be a celebration of her husband Marcus's latest triumph, a merger that would solidify his empire. But as Marcus stepped onto the stage, his hand didn't reach for hers. It was intertwined with a woman whose smile was as polished as the marble floors. A woman he introduced not as a colleague or friend, but with 3 words that shattered Isabella's world. My new wife. Little did he know that as he rewrote his life story, she was about to erase his name from every asset he owned. A shattered world, Isabella Vargas had long been the personification of discreet elegance. A woman who moved through Barcelona's golden circles of high society with an understated grace that many mistook for fragility. She was the perfect wife for a man like Marcus Thorne, a real estate magnate whose ambition was as towering as the skyscrapers that bore his name. Theirs was a life curated for magazine covers, a sprawling penthouse on the Passeig de Gracia with panoramic views of the Parc de la Ciutadella, summers in Mallorca, and an art collection that could rival a small museum. To the outside world, they were a power couple, a testament to having it all. But Isabella knew the truth. Her life, once a vibrant tapestry of shared dreams and passionate nights, had faded into a carefully orchestrated performance. Laughter no longer reached Marcus's eyes, and his touch, when it came, felt more like a formality than an act of affection. She had first noticed the shift about a year ago. At first it was subtle. Late nights at the office, he claimed, were for a demanding new project. A sudden obsession with his phone that he hid from her. The faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his collar that he attributed to a chance encounter with an overzealous client. Isabella, always pragmatic, had tried to address it. She suggested therapy, a vacation, anything to bridge the silently growing chasm between them. Marcus had dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, attributing her worries to the hormones of pregnancy. Yes, Isabella was 7 months pregnant with the child they had both so desperately wanted, a child she thought would be the glue to mend the cracks in their marriage. Now, the soft kicks in her belly felt less like a promise of new life, and more like a countdown to an impending storm. Tonight was the annual Sterling Enterprises Gala, a lavish event to celebrate a successful merger with a rival company. It was the culmination of a year of relentless work for Marcus, a deal that would cement his legacy. Isabella had spent the afternoon in a whirlwind of preparations, her personal stylist perfecting the deep sapphire blue gown that cascaded over her pregnant belly, a team of hairdressers and makeup artists sculpting her to be the perfect image of a billionaire's wife. But beneath the layers of silk and diamonds, a sense of unease gnawed at her. Marcus had been unusually distant all week, his conversations clipped, and his eyes hiding a secret she couldn't decipher. As she looked in the full-length mirror, a hand resting protectively on her stomach, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was dressing up for a sacrifice. The woman looking back at her was beautiful, serene, and utterly alone. The drive to the Majestic Hotel's grand ballroom was silent. The tension in the back of the Rolls-Royce so dense, it could have been cut with the diamond-encrusted letter opener he'd given her as a wedding gift. Marcus was engrossed in his phone, a small, tight smile on his lips as he typed. He didn't notice her hands trembling in her lap, nor how her gaze lingered on his profile, searching for a glimpse of the man she had married. The ballroom was a sea of familiar faces, business partners, rivals, and the elite, all draped in high fashion and dripping with jewels. The air buzzed with a mix of genuine admiration and thinly veiled envy for the man of the hour. As they entered, a wave of photographers descended on them. their flashes like a barrage of small explosions. Marcus, ever the showman, pulled her close, his arm a possessive weight around her shoulders, a smile plastered on his face for the cameras. It was a well-rehearsed pose, one they had perfected over the years. But tonight, it felt like a betrayal. During the cocktail hour, Isabella played her part with an acting performance worthy of a Goya Award. She smiled, she socialized, she accepted congratulations on Marcus's success and well wishes for her impending delivery. But her eyes kept returning to Marcus, who was the center of the room's attention. He was in his element, a king in his castle, and she was just another of his prized possessions on display. It was during dinner that the first tremor of the coming earthquake was felt. Isabella was seated at the head table, a carefully curated collection of the city's most influential figures. The conversation was a predictable blend of market trends and summer travel plans. She was picking at her deconstructed Caesar salad when a woman approached their table. She was stunning in an overtly sensual way that was the antithesis of Isabella's classic beauty. Her dress was a fiery red that hugged a figure of curves and confidence. Her dark hair was styled in loose, cascading waves, and her eyes, the color of warm whiskey, were fixed on Marcus. "Marcus, darling," she purred, in a low, seductive voice that seemed to silence the surrounding chatter. Isabella watched as Marcus's face, which had been a mask of cold professionalism, broke into a genuine, unguarded smile. It was a smile she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "Serena!" His voice held a nuance of intimacy that sent a fresh wave of ice through Isabella's veins. He stood, his hand resting on the small of Serena's back as he introduced her to the table. "Everyone, this is Serena Delgado, our new head of international marketing. She was instrumental in the final stages of the merger." Serena's eyes swept across the table. Her gaze lingered briefly on Isabella's pregnant belly before meeting her eyes. There was a flash of something in their depths, triumph, pity, or perhaps a mixture of both. "It's a pleasure to finally meet all of you," she said. Her smile never reached her eyes. Isabella's own smile felt frozen on her face. She extended a hand, her voice a cold, steady tone that gave no hint of the turmoil plaguing her. "Welcome to the team, Miss Delgado." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Isabella couldn't taste the seared scallops or the perfectly aged sirloin. The lively conversation around her faded into a dull murmur. The only thing she could focus on was how Marcus's attention constantly drifted back to Serena. The subtle glances, the shared smiles, the easy camaraderie that spoke of a history Isabella was not a part of. She felt a hand on her arm and turned to see her father, Judge Roberto Vargas, a retired magistrate with a razor-sharp mind and an even sharper intuition, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right, Isabella? You look pale." She forced a reassuring smile. "Just a little tired, Papa. This baby is taking all my energy." But her father's gaze was fixed on Marcus, who was now laughing at something Serena had whispered in his ear. When he looked back at Isabella, his expression was grim. He knew, just as she did, that this was more than a mere flirtation. It was a paradigm shift, a tectonic plate moving under the foundation of their lives. As the dessert plates were cleared and waiters began pouring the celebratory champagne, Marcus stood, tapping his glass to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the man at the podium. Isabella's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had a premonition, a cold, nauseating certainty that what he was about to say would change everything. He began with the usual words of thanks to his team, his partners, the board of directors. He spoke of the future of expansion, of a new era for Sterling Enterprises. And then he paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed not on Isabella, but on Serena. "This merger is not the only new chapter in my life," he began, his voice resonating with a conviction that chilled Isabella's blood. He motioned for Serena to join him on stage. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her red dress a slash of color against the dark suits and muted tones of the room. Marcus took her hand, his thumb stroking its back, as he turned to face the stunned audience. "As many of you know, my personal life has been in a state of transition." He glanced briefly, almost scornfully, in Isabella's direction. "Isabella and I have been separated for some time." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. It was a lie, a brazen, bold-faced lie. They lived in the same house. They slept in the same bed. They were expecting a child together. But Marcus wasn't finished. He raised Serena's hand to his lips. His eyes never left hers. "And so with immense joy, I present to you the future of Sterling Enterprises and the future of my life." He paused for dramatic effect, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that reached every corner of the room. "My new wife, Serena Thorne." The world tilted on its axis. The chandeliers seemed to sway. The murmur of the room dissolved into a deafening roar in Isabella's ears. She saw the flash of a diamond ring on Serena's finger, a gaudy, ostentatious thing that was so different from the classic elegance of the ring Marcus had given her. She saw the triumphant smile on Serena's face, the smug satisfaction in her eyes. And she saw the coldness, the unapologetic finality in Marcus's. He hadn't just had an affair. He had been living a double life. He had replaced her not just in his bed, but in his entire world. And he had chosen to announce it in the most public and humiliating way possible. In that moment, something inside Isabella broke. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation. It all coalesced into a single, white-hot point of fury. The fragile, elegant facade she had so carefully maintained for years shattered, and in its place, a woman of steel emerged. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood, her movements slow and deliberate, a queen surveying the ruins of her kingdom. She met Marcus's gaze across the crowded room, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He had mistaken her silence for weakness, her grace for submission. He had made a fatal error. As the first whispers of astonishment began to ripple through the ballroom, Isabella turned and walked away, her head held high. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The war had just been declared, and she was already planning her first move. He had introduced his lover as his new wife. Tomorrow, his pregnant and soon-to-be ex-wife would freeze all his assets and then dismantle his empire piece by piece. If you were Isabella in that moment, what would be your first move after leaving the gala? A calculated strike. The walk out of the Majestic Hotel's grand ballroom was the longest of Isabella's life. Each step was a battle against the tide of emotions that threatened to consume her. The shocked faces of her friends and colleagues blurred into a kaleidoscope of pity and morbid curiosity. She could feel their eyes on her back, their whispers like 1,000 tiny needles pricking her skin. But she didn't falter. Her spine remained ramrod straight, her chin held at an angle of defiance. She was a Vargas, and she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall. The moment the heavy oak doors of the ballroom closed behind her, cutting off the cacophony of her public humiliation, her composure fractured. A single, ragged sob escaped her lips, a sound of such raw anguish that it seemed to echo in the cavernous, empty hallway. She leaned against the cold marble wall, her hand pressed against her stomach, as if to shield her unborn child from the shrapnel of his father's betrayal. Her chauffeur, a kind, elderly man named Arturo, who had been with her family for years, rushed to her side, his face etched with concern. "Senora Vargas, are you all right?" Isabella couldn't speak. She simply nodded, a gesture that was more of a tremble than a confirmation. Arturo, with a discretion born of long years of service to the wealthy and their often dramatic lives, simply opened the door of the waiting Rolls-Royce and helped her in. The drive back to the penthouse on Passeig de Gracia was a blur of city lights and silent tears. The glittering skyline that had once been a symbol of her and Marcus's shared ambition now seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of the life that had been so cruelly snatched away. When she arrived, the apartment felt cavernous and cold, a mausoleum of broken promises. The photographs on the walls, a curated collection of their happiest moments, now felt like a cruel joke. There was one of them on their wedding day, Marcus's eyes alight with what she had thought was love. Another of them in St. Bart's, their skin tanned and their smiles carefree. And the most recent one, a professional shot from a few months ago, her pregnant belly just beginning to show, Marcus's hand resting protectively on it. A lie. It was all a lie. With a surge of fury, she ripped the photo from the wall, the sound of the glass shattering a satisfying counterpoint to the shattering of her heart. One by one, she tore down the images of their life together, until the walls were bare and the floor was covered with the fragments of their shared past. Exhausted and emotionally drained, she sank into the plush white sofa, the silence of the apartment pressing in on her. The rage that had sustained her had given way to a deep, bone-weary sadness. How could she have been so blind? All the signs had been there. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the emotional distance. She had chosen to ignore them, to believe in the fantasy she had so desperately wanted to be real. She thought of the baby, their son, and a fresh wave of pain washed over her. He would be born into a broken home, a pawn in a war he didn't start. But as she cradled her belly, a new resolve began to take root in the barren landscape of her heart. She would not let Marcus destroy her son's life as he had destroyed hers. She would fight not just for herself, but for her child. She took her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. There was only one person she could call, one person she knew would understand the complexities of the world she was about to go to war with. The phone rang twice before a crisp, no-nonsense voice answered. "Isabella, it's after midnight. Is everything all right?" It was her father, Judge Roberto Vargas, a man whose reputation for integrity and sharp legal acumen was legendary in Barcelona's legal circles. He had retired from the bench 5 years ago, but his mind was as sharp as ever. "Papa," Isabella's voice cracked. "I need you." Without hesitation, he responded, "I'm on my way." An hour later, her father was sitting across from her, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face a grim mask as she recounted the evening's events. She left nothing out, from the subtle signs of Marcus's affair to the brutal public announcement of his new wife. When she finished, the only sound in the room was the soft clink of ice in her father's glass. He took a long, slow sip before he spoke, his voice quiet and measured. "The man is a fool, a cruel and arrogant fool." He leaned forward, his eyes the same shade of deep blue as hers, locking with hers. "But he has made one critical error. He has underestimated you. And that, my dear, is where we have the advantage." He set his glass down on the polished mahogany coffee table, the sound a sharp, decisive thud. "First thing in the morning, we call my lawyer. Not yours and Marcus's. Not a family lawyer. My lawyer. A shark. We're going to hit him where it hurts the most, Isabella. We're going after his money." A flash of the old Isabella, the woman who had once been an ambitious and sharp corporate lawyer before she gave it up to be Marcus's wife, shone in her eyes, But how? All our assets are in joint accounts and trusts. He has a team of the best financial advisors in the country. Her father smiled, a cold, predatory smile she had seen him use on the bench to intimidate cocky young lawyers. He may have a team of advisors, but we have something better. We have the truth, and we have the element of surprise. He's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. He won't expect a fight. He'll expect you to crumble, to retreat, to negotiate a quiet, dignified divorce. We will do none of that. He stopped in front of her, his hand resting on her shoulder. We will be relentless. We will be tireless. And we will win. For the first time since she had walked out of that ballroom, Isabella felt a flicker of hope. She was not alone in this fight. She had her father, a man who had never lost a battle in his life, and she had a new, steely determination. Marcus had started a war. She was going to finish it. The war begins the next morning. Isabella woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The pain was still there, a dull ache in her chest, but now it was overlaid with a cold, clear rage. She dressed, not in one of her usual feminine flowing dresses, but in an impeccably tailored pantsuit, the kind she used to wear when she was a lawyer. It was armor, a statement of intent. She met her father in his study, a room lined with leather-bound law books and filled with the scent of old paper and wood smoke. Standing beside him was a woman in her late 40s, her hair cut in a severe, no-nonsense bob, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "Isabella, this is Emilia Romero," her father said. "The best divorce lawyer in Barcelona, and for the next few months, your new best friend." Emilia Romero shook her hand, her grip firm and her gaze direct. "Señora Vargas, I've read the prenuptial agreement you sent last night. It's comprehensive." Isabella nodded. The prenup had been Marcus's idea, a standard precaution for a man of his wealth. She had signed it without hesitation, blinded by love and the belief that it would never be more than a piece of paper in a file. "It is," Isabella agreed. "But it was signed under the assumption of a faithful and honest marriage. Marcus has breached both conditions." Emilia's lips curved into a slight smile. "Indeed he has. And his very public and humiliating declaration of a new marriage while he is still legally married to you, and with you carrying his child, is a gift. A very, very expensive gift." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "We need to act quickly before he has a chance to hide his assets. We will be filing for an immediate injunction, a temporary restraining order that will freeze all joint accounts, trusts, and lines of credit. We will also be placing a lien on all of his properties, both personal and commercial." Isabella's eyes widened. "Is that possible?" "It is when you have a husband who has so flagrantly and publicly committed adultery and emotional distress," Emilia said, her voice imbued with the confidence of a woman who knew she was at the top of her game. "We will argue that he is a flight risk, that he may attempt to move his assets offshore to protect them from the divorce settlement. Given his impulsive behavior, it is not an unreasonable argument." She slid a document across the table to Isabella. "This is the petition. I need you to read it carefully, and then sign it." Isabella took the pen, her hands steady. She read the legalese, the cold and formal language, a stark contrast to the hot, chaotic emotions of the past 24 hours. But as she read, she felt a sense of power. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman taking control of her life. She signed her name with a firm, decisive stroke. "Good," Emilia said, taking the document back. "I will file this in an hour. By lunchtime, Marcus Thorne will find himself a very rich man with no access to his money." A small, grim smile touched Isabella's lips. The war had begun, and she had just fired the first shot. The downfall. The news of the injunction hit Marcus Thorne like a physical blow. He was in a board meeting, basking in the glow of his successful merger and his audacious public declaration of his new life with Serena. He felt invincible, on top of the world. And then his phone vibrated, a frantic message from his personal banker. "All your accounts have been frozen. Call me immediately." Marcus excused himself from the meeting, a knot of confusion and irritation tightening in his stomach. He dialed his banker, his voice sharp with impatience. "What the hell is going on? I have a multi-million-dollar deal closing this afternoon." The banker's voice was strained and apologetic. "I'm sorry, Marcus. We received a judicial order this morning, a temporary restraining order. All your personal and business assets are frozen pending a court hearing." Marcus's blood ran cold. "On what grounds?" "A petition filed by your wife, Isabella Vargas." The name hung in the air, a testament to his own monumental stupidity. Isabella. He had dismissed her. He had ignored her. He had humiliated her. He had expected her to roll over, to retreat into her grief and accept a quiet, generous settlement. He had not expected this. He had not expected her to fight back. He ended the call, his hands shaking with a rage so intense it was almost blinding. He stormed back into the boardroom, his face a mask of thunder. "The meeting is over," he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He turned to his personal assistant. "Get me Amelia Romero on the phone. Now." He knew the name. Amelia Romero was a shark, a pit bull in a designer suit. The fact that Isabella had hired her was a clear declaration of war. He spent the next hour on the phone with his own legal team. Their voices were a chorus of panic, disbelief, and damage control. The injunction was ironclad. Isabella had timed it perfectly, hitting him at his most vulnerable point right after his public display of arrogance. The judge, no doubt swayed by her father's reputation and the sheer audacity of Marcus's actions, had granted the order without hesitation. He was, to all intents and purposes, a cash-poor billionaire. His credit cards were declined. His lines of credit were suspended. The deal he was supposed to close that afternoon was now in jeopardy. His fury, which had been a simmering volcano, finally erupted. He swept his arm across his mahogany desk, sending a cascade of papers, a laptop, and a half-empty coffee cup crashing to the floor. He let out a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, a sound that echoed through the silent, terrified hallways of Sterling Enterprises. He had built this empire from the ground up. He had clawed his way to the top of a ruthless and unforgiving industry. He would not be brought down by a woman he had so carelessly discarded. He grabbed his phone and dialed Isabella's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again, each unanswered call fueling his rage. He left a series of increasingly vitriolic messages, his voice hoarse with a mixture of threats and disbelief. "How dare you, Isabella? After everything I've given you, you'll regret this. I'll see you in court. I'll take everything from you. You'll be left with nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." But his threats sounded hollow, even to his own ears. He held no power here. She had outsmarted him. She had taken his greatest strength, his wealth, and turned it into his greatest weakness. Meanwhile, Isabella was in Amelia Romero's office, an oasis of calm, with muted colors, and quiet professionalism in the heart of the city. She had listened with a detached sense of vindication to Marcus's increasingly frantic messages. She felt no fear, only a cold, hard certainty that she had made the right decision. "He's panicking," Amelia said, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. "And when people panic, they make mistakes." She slid a new set of documents across the table to Isabella. "This is a list of forensic accountants, the best in the business. We need to find out exactly what he's worth, where all his money is hidden. Marcus is a smart man. He'll have offshore accounts, shell companies, assets hidden in places we don't even know exist. Isabella nodded, her mind already shifting into the familiar analytical mode of her former legal career. I can help with that. I may have been out of the game for a while, but I know how he thinks. I know the types of risks he's willing to take. She recalled conversations she had overheard, late-night phone calls she had pretended not to hear, discreet meetings with men whose names she had memorized. She had a wealth of information, a roadmap to Marcus's hidden empire that she had never even realized she possessed. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of her own power, a power that had nothing to do with her husband's name or money. It was her own intelligence, her own resilience, her own strength. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of meetings and phone calls. Isabella and Amelia assembled their team, a formidable force of legal and financial experts. They worked with a quiet, focused intensity, fueled by a shared sense of purpose and a righteous anger. That night, when Isabella returned to the empty penthouse, she found a package waiting for her. It had no return address. Inside, on a bed of tissue paper, was a single, exquisitely crafted golden key. Attached to it was a note, written in her father's elegant, familiar script. For your new home, a new beginning. You are stronger than you know, Isabella, and you are not alone. The address was for an elegant townhouse in the Salamanca neighborhood, a beautiful historic building on a quiet, tree-lined street, a place that was hers and hers alone. She looked around the penthouse, at the bare walls and the lingering ghosts of a life that was no longer hers. She felt a pang of sadness, a last fleeting moment of grief for the love she had believed was real. And then she turned and walked away, the golden key clutched in her hand. She wasn't just freezing his assets, she was freezing him out of her life. She was starting over, and she was ready for whatever came next. What do you think is the biggest mistake Marcus made, besides the affair itself? Unmasking the deception. The first court hearing was a spectacle. The media, catching wind of the salacious details of the Thorne divorce, had descended on the courthouse in a frenzy. The story had all the elements of a blockbuster drama: a billionaire magnate, a scorned, pregnant wife, and a beautiful, ambitious mistress. Isabella, flanked by her father and Amelia Romero, moved through the crowd of reporters with a quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to Marcus's thinly veiled rage. He arrived with Serena on his arm, a move clearly intended to be a show of defiance, but that only served to make him look arrogant and foolish in the eyes of the judge. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with animosity. Isabella avoided looking at Marcus, focusing instead on her father's quiet, steady presence at her side. She could feel Marcus's eyes on her, a gaze burning with anger and betrayal. But she refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Amelia Romero was brilliant. She laid out her case with cold, methodical precision, presenting the evidence of Marcus's public humiliation of Isabella, his blatant adultery, and the potential for him to hide his assets. She painted a picture of a reckless, impulsive, and untrustworthy man. Marcus's lawyer, an expensive corporate attorney, who was clearly out of his element in the messy world of divorce court, blustered and objected, but his arguments were weak and unconvincing. The judge, a severe, no-nonsense woman, with a reputation for being tough on arrogant husbands, was clearly unimpressed. She upheld the injunction, extending it for another 30 days. She also granted Isabella the exclusive use of the penthouse on Passeig de Gracia, a move that sent a fresh wave of fury across Marcus's face. And in a final, crushing blow, she ordered Marcus to pay Isabella's legal fees and a substantial monthly sum for living expenses. Marcus stormed out of the courtroom, his face a mask of thunderous anger. Serena, her face pale and tight, hurried after him. Isabella watched them go, a small, grim sense of satisfaction settling in her heart. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. In the weeks that followed, Isabella and her team of forensic accountants began the painstaking process of unraveling Marcus's complex financial empire. It was a labyrinth of shell companies, offshore accounts, and cleverly hidden assets. But Isabella had been a better student of her husband's business than he had ever realized. She remembered names he had mentioned in passing, snippets of conversations she had overheard, details she had filed away in the back of her mind without even realizing it. She worked tirelessly, poring over documents, following money trails, connecting dots that no one else could see. And as she dug deeper, she began to uncover a pattern of deception that went far beyond infidelity. Marcus hadn't just been cheating on her. He had been cheating his partners, his investors, and the tax agency. He had been siphoning off profits, laundering money, and engaging in a series of illegal activities that could not only destroy his business, but also land him in prison. The revelation was a shock, but it also solidified her determination. This was no longer just about a divorce. This was about justice. This was about exposing Marcus for the corrupt, immoral man he truly was. One afternoon, while working late in her new townhouse in the Salamanca neighborhood, a place that was fast becoming her sanctuary, her private investigator called. He had been looking into Serena Delgado's background, and he had found something interesting. Serena Delgado is not her real name. His voice was low and conspiratorial. Her name is Serena Lopez, and she has a history, a long history, of attaching herself to rich, powerful men, and then disappearing with a sizable chunk of their fortunes. He sent Isabella a file, a collection of articles, police reports, and court documents. It was a sordid history of seduction, betrayal, and financial ruin. Serena was a professional, a black widow who had left a trail of broken men and empty bank accounts in her wake. Isabella's blood ran cold. Marcus hadn't just been having an affair with a beautiful, ambitious woman. He had been snared by a predator, a con artist who was likely playing a long-term game. A new and terrifying idea occurred to her. Was Serena working alone, or was she part of a larger scheme? Was Marcus a victim in all of this, as well as a perpetrator? The question hung in the air, a chilling possibility that changed the entire dynamic of the game. Isabella realized that this was no longer a two-player battle. There was a third player, a shadowy figure whose motives and endgame were a complete mystery. She looked at the file on her computer screen, at the smiling, beautiful face of Serena Lopez, and for the first time she felt a flicker of something close to pity for her husband. He had been a fool, a cruel and arrogant fool, but he had also been a pawn in a much more dangerous game than he had ever imagined. And Isabella, in her quest for justice, had just stumbled into the middle of it. The stakes had just been raised, and the danger was no longer just financial. It was personal, and it was deadly. The next day, Isabella received a package. There was no return address. Inside, on a bed of tissue paper, was a single, perfect white rose and a note written in elegant, cursive handwriting. "Be careful, Isabella. You are not the only one who wants to see Marcus Thorne fall." The message was clear. She had an anonymous ally, someone watching her from the shadows, someone who knew more about Marcus and Serena than she did. But who was it? A disgruntled business partner, a former victim of Serena, or someone else entirely? The mystery deepened and the danger intensified. Isabella knew she was walking a tightrope, with Marcus's rage on one side and an unknown, shadowy entity on the other. But she also knew she couldn't turn back. She had come too far. She had to see this through, not just for herself and her son, but for all the other people Marcus and Serena had harmed. She placed the white rose in a vase on her desk, a symbol of the strange, dangerous alliance she had unknowingly formed. The game was on, and she was ready to play. She was no longer just a scorned wife seeking revenge. She was a woman on a mission, a warrior fighting for truth and justice in a world of lies and deceit, and she would not rest until she had uncovered the entire ugly truth, no matter the cost. What do you think is the biggest risk Isabella is taking by continuing her investigation? And what would you advise her to do? The final gambit. The single white rose rested on Isabella's desk, a beautiful but unsettling symbol. Its cryptic message, "Be careful, Isabella. You are not the only one who wants to see Marcus Thorne fall," was a constant reminder that she was navigating a battlefield with more players than she could see. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a conspiracy, and she was caught in the middle, uncertain of who was friend or foe. Her days became a disciplined routine of war room strategy sessions with Emilia Romero and the forensic accountants. The woman who once planned galas was now hunting down shell corporations in offshore tax havens. Immersed in financial statements and legal documents, Isabella felt a dormant part of herself reawaken. The sharp, analytical mind of the corporate lawyer she had been before she married Marcus. She was rediscovering her own strength, a power independent of the Thorne name. As Isabella grew stronger, Marcus crumbled. The asset freeze had him in a chokehold, his business was hemorrhaging investors, and his reputation was in tatters. The tension was also affecting Serena. Monitored by Isabella's investigator, the triumphant mistress had transformed into a tense, nervous figure, the pressure clearly mounting. They were trapped animals, and Isabella knew that trapped animals are dangerous, but also predictable. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the form of a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single USB drive. No note, no rose, just a small black rectangle that promised answers. Her instincts, which had become her most reliable guide, told her this was a pivotal moment. She inserted the drive into her laptop, her heart pounding. A single, password-protected folder appeared. On a hunch, she typed a name. Lopez. It opened. What she found was astonishing. The drive contained a meticulously compiled dossier on Serena Delgado, whose real name was Serena Lopez. It detailed a sordid history of seducing rich, powerful men and then disappearing with a substantial portion of their fortunes. But the truth was even more complex. The drive contained copies of emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls between Serena and a male collaborator. They spoke of Marcus as the mark and the merger as payday. Their plan was cold and clinical. Serena would secure her position as the new Mrs. Thorne, and then, together, they would bleed Marcus's empire dry. The most chilling revelation was that this collaborator was not just a partner in crime. He was Serena's husband. They were a professional team of predators. As Isabella scrolled through the incriminating evidence, a familiar name in an email made her blood run cold. It was the name of the man who had been Marcus's closest friend and business partner for over a decade. A man who had offered Isabella his deepest condolences on the night of the gala. It was Oscar Solar. The entire conspiracy clicked into place with nauseating clarity. Oscar, eaten away by a secret envy of Marcus's success, was the mastermind. He had provided Serena with the inside information needed to ensnare Marcus. He had orchestrated the entire affair to destroy Marcus, personally and professionally. The white rose, the anonymous tips, it had all come from Oscar. He had been using Isabella as his own unwitting weapon, hoping she would be a predictable, grief-stricken wife, whose legal actions would serve his own vindictive plan perfectly. He had made the same mistake as Marcus. He had fatally underestimated her. Leaning back, her mind reeling, Isabella saw the entire chessboard. This was never just about Marcus's infidelity. It was a multi-layered betrayal, and she had been cast as a pawn. But pawns, she thought, with a surge of cold fury, can become queens. She would not be an instrument of Oscar Solar's revenge. She would be the agent of his, and Serena's, downfall. She picked up her phone, her hand steady and her purpose clear. "Papa," she said in a calm, resolute voice, "I know who our anonymous ally is. He's not our ally at all, and I know exactly what we have to do." Isabella walked into Amelia Romero's office the next morning, not as a victim, but as a strategist. She laid out the evidence from the USB drive, detailing the entire sordid plot. Amelia's professional composure was tinged with awe. "This is criminal," the lawyer stated. "Conspiracy, fraud, extortion. We take this to the district attorney." "We will," Isabella nodded, "but we'll do it my way." A plan was already forming in her mind. A trap not just for Serena, but for the puppet master himself. She would turn their own conspiracy against them. The game had changed, and Isabella was about to make her move. The plan was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, as audacious as it was brilliant. It relied on exploiting the very greed and arrogance that had driven her enemies. Isabella, guided by Amelia and her father, was no longer just a participant in this war. She was its architect. The first move was to create an illusion, a phantom asset so tempting that it would be impossible for Oscar and Serena to ignore. Through a trusted media contact, a story was carefully leaked. It whispered of a secret, offshore holding in the Bahamas, an untouched reserve of Marcus's wealth, worth hundreds of millions, that was now being prepared for liquidation in his desperation. The asset was a complete fabrication, a ghost born in the strategy sessions in Amelia Romero's office. But it was designed to seem entirely real. Predictably, the story ignited a firestorm in the financial world and, more importantly, landed squarely in the hands of Oscar Solar and Serena Delgado. Isabella's private investigator confirmed their frantic reaction. They were circling the bait, ready to be reeled in. To force their hand, Amelia filed a new motion in court. It was a bold legal maneuver seeking to have Marcus declared financially incompetent due to his erratic behavior and Serena's undue influence. The motion requested a court-appointed administrator to take control of all Thorn assets to protect them. This was a direct threat to Oscar and Serena's endgame. If an administrator stepped in, their phantom prize in the Bahamas would vanish into a legal quagmire. The clock was ticking. They had to make their move now. The trap was set. The call Isabella had been waiting for came on a stormy Thursday night. It was Marcus, his voice stripped of its usual bravado, replaced with a raw, desperate note. "Isabella, we have to talk," he began, the words strained. "It's about Serena, about everything." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was a steady, cold line in the storm. "I'm listening." He stumbled through a panicked story. Serena had presented him with a lifeline, a way to get his money out and escape. She told him about the Bahamas company, a forgotten asset, and claimed she had a private investor ready to buy it for cash. No questions asked. Marcus, desperate to regain any semblance of control, had almost agreed. But a sliver of doubt, a flicker of his old business acumen, had stopped him. He finally saw the predatory glint in Serena's eyes for what it was. "I think she's been playing me, Isabella," he whispered, his voice broken by the admission. "I think she's been cheating me this whole time." This was the critical moment. "She is, Marcus," Isabella said, her voice softening with an unexpected wave of pity. And she isn't working alone. She laid out the entire conspiracy to him. Serena's true identity, Oscar Solar's profound betrayal, the cold, calculated plan to destroy him completely. A long, strangled silence hung on the line, the sound of a man's world completely crumbling. "What do I do?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "You do exactly what I tell you," she commanded, her tone now firm, authoritative. "You play your part. And for once, Marcus, you trust me." The final act was staged in a discreet, high-end downtown club, a bastion of old money and whispered deals. Marcus, wired with a microphone provided by the prosecutor's office, would meet Serena and her investor to sign the sale of the Phantom Company. Isabella was staked out in a surveillance van a block away, her eyes glued to the monitors, showing the drama unfolding, flanked by detectives from the National Police's white-collar crime unit. She watched Marcus enter, his performance as a broken, desperate man unsettlingly convincing. Serena, a vision in crimson, greeted him with a kiss that was pure poison. And then the investor arrived. It was Oscar Solar, walking in with the unshakable confidence of a man who believes he has already won. The three sat down, the air thick with deception. Isabella listened, her breath held, as Marcus played his part to perfection, feigning hesitation and doubt, pulling his enemies deeper into the web. Finally, Oscar's patience ran out. He dropped the pretense, his voice dripping with poisonous pride as he boasted of his master plan, of how he had orchestrated Marcus's ruin from the beginning, mocking his friend's blindness and arrogance. Serena joined in, her contempt palpable, as she recounted her methods of manipulation. It was a full, damning confession, piped directly to the detectives in the van. With the confession recorded, Isabella gave the signal. Just as Oscar slid the final document across the table for Marcus's signature, the doors to the private room burst open. "National Police," the detectives announced, showing their badges. "Oscar Solar, Serena Delgado, you're under arrest." The transformation on their faces was instantaneous and absolute. The smug triumph turned into pure, primal terror. As they were led away in handcuffs, their expensive clothes suddenly looked like cheap costumes. Oscar's eyes locked on a security camera. In that moment, he knew. He hadn't been defeated by Marcus. He had been completely outsmarted and destroyed by the woman he had fatally underestimated. Isabella leaned back in her chair in the van, a long, slow breath of victory escaping her lips. It was over. She had won. As she stepped out into the cool city night, she felt a profound sense of liberation. She had faced the architects of her misery. Using her own intelligence and courage, she had brought their world crashing down. She was Isabella Vargas, and she was at last undeniably free. A new beginning. In the wake of the arrests, the full extent of Oscar Solar and Serena Delgado's deception was laid bare for the world to see. The story dominated the news cycle for weeks, a salacious tale of greed, betrayal, and high society intrigue. The trial was a media circus, with every detail of the conspiracy dissected and analyzed in agonizing detail. Oscar and Serena, faced with the overwhelming evidence against them, including their own recorded confessions, had no choice but to plead guilty. They were sentenced to long prison terms, their glamorous lives reduced to the stark, sterile reality of a prison cell. For Marcus, the reckoning was of a different kind. He had been a victim, but not an innocent one. His arrogance, his infidelity, his cruelty toward Isabella had been the catalyst for his own downfall. He had lost his company, his reputation, and the respect of everyone who had ever mattered to him. The injunction on his assets was eventually lifted, but what remained was a fraction of his former fortune. He was a rich man, but he was no longer a king. He was humbled, broken, a man forced to face the wreckage of his own making. He and Isabella finalized their divorce in silence, without the drama and acrimony that had defined the beginning of their separation. In the end, there was nothing left to fight for. On the day the divorce was finalized, Marcus asked to see her one last time. They met in a small, neutral cafe, a world away from the glamorous restaurants and exclusive clubs they had once frequented. He looked older, tired. The arrogance that had once been his defining trait was gone, replaced by a quiet, deep sadness. "I'm sorry, Isabella." His voice was hoarse with a sincerity she had never heard from him before. "For everything. For my cruelty, for my foolishness, for not appreciating the incredible woman I had by my side." He looked down at his hands, at the faint tan line where his wedding ring used to be. "You were always too good for me. I see that now." Isabella listened, a strange sense of peace washing over her. The anger, the bitterness, it had all dissipated, leaving a clean, quiet space. "I forgive you, Marcus," she said, and she meant it. "Not for you, but for me. I cannot carry that anger with me into my new life." She stood to leave, her hand resting for a moment on her now prominent pregnant belly. "I wish you well, Marcus. I hope you find some peace." And with that, she walked away, leaving him with his coffee and his regrets. It was the definitive end of a chapter of her life that had been defined by him. A few weeks later, Isabella gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. She named him Matteo, after her grandfather, a man of quiet strength and unwavering integrity. She held him in her arms, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and felt a love so fierce, so profound, that it eclipsed everything that had come before. He was her future, her hope, her reason for being. She raised him in the townhouse in Salamanca, a home filled with love, laughter, and the scent of freshly baked bread, in contrast to the cold, sterile perfection of the penthouse on Passeig de Gracia. Her father was a constant, loving presence, a proud grandfather who delighted in spoiling his grandson. Isabella did not return to the world of corporate law. She had found a new calling. She used a portion of her divorce settlement to start a foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing legal and financial assistance to women who were victims of financial abuse and fraud. She became a champion for the voiceless, a warrior for the vulnerable. She used her own experience, her own hard-won wisdom, to help other women reclaim their lives, their power, their sense of self. She was no longer Isabella Thorne, the billionaire's wife. She was Isabella Vargas, a mother, a philanthropist, a woman who had taken the broken pieces of her life and rebuilt them into something stronger, more beautiful, and infinitely more meaningful. One sunny afternoon, as she pushed Matteo in his stroller through the Parc della Ciutadella, she saw a familiar figure in the distance. It was Marcus, sitting alone on a park bench, throwing breadcrumbs to the pigeons. He looked up and saw her, and for a moment their eyes met across the green expanse of the park. He gave her a small, sad smile, a silent acknowledgement of all that was lost and all that was found. Isabella smiled back, a genuine, radiant smile of a woman who was at peace with her past and excited for her future. And then she turned and went on her way, pushing her son toward the playground, toward the laughter and the sunshine, toward the beautiful, ordinary, and extraordinary life she had built for herself. The drama was over. The story was hers to write. And it was just beginning. What did you think of the unexpected twist involving Oscar? Did you believe Serena was the only mastermind behind everything? The story of Isabella Vargas is a powerful reminder that the greatest strength is often forged in the deepest betrayal. She transformed from a scorned wife into the master of her own destiny, proving that with intelligence, courage, and a refusal to be a victim, you can not only survive the storm, but also learn to master the winds